We're going to shift now to your papers on financial advice, where there are, I think, even more papers this time around.
One, two,
Or
three,
maybe,
three. Yeah, three. Yeah,
yeah, same
the
number before.
magic
Three.
three. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm super excited for these ones. I
Mhm.
I found all these papers to be really interesting. Okay, so the first one, I think this one's published in the Journal of Financial Economics, on the effects of robo advice. And again, so this is like your perspective from Vanguard is just such an interesting place to do this research from. So, how impactful have robo advisors been on the portfolios of previously DIY investors?
Well, actually, pretty profound. Before I get to that, I just want to say this is a project with my longstanding collaborator Alberto Rossi at Georgetown, and Alberto, when I were actually not sitting far from where I'm speaking, we were at the Wharton School at a seminar, and he came to me and said, "Steve, I have an idea for a project." And so here we are many years later. But in any event, so at the time, Vanguard was beginning to roll out what is a hybrid robo advisory service. It's not actually the largest robo advisory service, but it's hybrid, and that's an important distinction. It has a human
Hmm.
element to it. The investment process is highly automated. The methodology is highly automated. You can customize it. An advisor can customize it, but it's a structured customization. An advisor just can't arbitrarily pick something based on their own personal beliefs, but on this structured methodology. So it varied a lot, but the best way to think about it is it fixed the common financial errors that you see, the common portfolio errors that you see most retail investors making. The biggest one being too much cash, sitting on cash, uninvested,
Hmm.
regardless of risk aversion, it's just sitting there. Um, Being undiversified internationally,
Hmm.
generally speaking. There were some people who were very well diversified internationally, but that was not the norm. Not thinking intentionally about portfolio equity risk share. I mean, what was interesting is on average, the portfolio equity risk share pre and post, like DIY, say advised investors, didn't shift that much. But individually, there are a lot of people whose share went up and went down because they hadn't actually gone through any structured process. They sort of ended up where they were, not based on a
Hmm.
sense of what level of risk am I willing to take with my portfolio, but they really ended up there almost by accident. And then the other thing was active passive mix. So there was a strong emphasis on passive with active as a supplemental strategy. But we had DIY clients who just, for example, put a whole bunch of money into a small cap active fund with no real sense of why they're allocating that much money to small cap or to active versus an active passive blend or anything like that. So that's pretty much what the investment advisory methodology did. And the way to think about this is really any financial advisor has an efficient frontier that they believe in. And luckily, for Vanguard, the efficient frontier we were offering people is a beautifully efficient empirical, in academic finance terms, frontier. So we were able to measure, we were able to estimate, for example, improvements in Sharpe ratios
Hmm.
across the sample, and on average, Sharpe ratios rose. But it's through fixing all of these portfolio construction errors and moving people closer to a very efficient frontier that's really the effect of the robo advisor.
Wow.
And that's what you'd
So
expect any advisor, but this was a particularly efficient frontier.
yeah. Seems really really impactful. Like it seems like that robo advisors have probably been a pretty good positive innovation for previously DIY investors.
Right. Not everyone, though. Interestingly, there's a group of people, and they were the people more likely to leave the service over time who sort of came by, got a portfolio checkup, said, "You read Bogle and mutual funds, you're very well organized." And then they went on their way. But by and large, one of the things that we found encouraging, and actually the business leaders of the service found encouraging, is that the people who needed it most are the people who stuck around, because it was the people who made the largest errors who were more likely to say, "This, I really perceive this service to be valuable." Now they have very high retention rates, but the people who did a really good job more often they were more willing to say, "Okay, I don't really need an advisor. I'll come back in a couple of years and get another portfolio check. But most of the clients who stayed, uh, they were they were fixing really significant individual portfolio errors.
Yeah, and so I think you more or less just answered that. But what type of investor benefits the most then from switching to a robo advisor?
Really, the ones, yeah, the ones who make the most
Yeah,
mistakes, and
yeah,
the ones who the highest Sharpe ratio gains were among the people who are doing all those problems that we were just mentioning.
right.
And you know, I do think that's if you really had to ask, people struggle with the technology of portfolio construction. I know for us, a lot of it's just intuitive and because we are used to recommending portfolios to clients and thinking about portfolio risk and how to put the pieces together. But I think that's really the real advantage where this comes into play. And particularly remember, as clients get new money or they have to withdraw money, uh, half of these clients are still having inflows because they're working. Other clients were spending from their portfolios, so rebalancing their strategy, maintaining their strategy in the face of market stresses. All those reasons were uh, all those really were the opportunities for being, having benefit from the service.
How does switching to a robo advisor affect investors' time use?
So this is a, yeah, I assume you guys think about this a little bit. I mean, one of the advantages of advisors is labor specialization. Your clients don't have to do it on their own, right? Um, so we estimate you save about 6 hours of monitoring and managing your portfolio a year by in this particular setting where you switch from being DIY to having the Vanguard advisor. The interesting thing is this isn't the time spent. For example, if you're a DIY investor, you have to spend a considerable amount of time learning and building sort of an endowment of financial knowledge. This is really just
Hmm.
probably what we're measuring here is just the, well, I know what we're measuring here. What we're measuring here is just the time needed to manage a portfolio on an ongoing basis, but not necessarily the hours that you need to read or engage yourself in personal development efforts to build your financial knowledge. So I think that's why when 6 hours seems on one hand a lot of time to be spending managing your portfolio in a given year, but on the other hand, that's all it is. It's not any of the information you need to gather to develop points of view, to develop information about how you should allocate or change or trade your portfolio.
Yeah, interesting. And it sounds like a lot of the people in this sample maybe should have been spending more time building the endowment because they had significant portfolio improvements.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It's really, but you know what? It's for example, you see this, I'm sure, in your own business, that the cash problem is partly a knowledge problem. Like, what do I do
Hmm.
with new cash and how do I allocate it? But it's also an inertia problem. Like, I have to get to a computer, I have to spend time, I have to think, I have to execute a trade, I have to follow up. Did it go through correctly? Is it the right amount? Those are a lot of daunting questions for someone who's trying to run another part of their life, So that's where the advantage of
Yeah.
the advisor comes in.
I think people delay based on stuff like, I'm going to wait till the election's over, or I'm going to wait until whatever.
Right. There's always going to be election. There's always going to be a war. There's always going to be a recession or a
Yeah.
boom.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if robo advisors can automate the portfolio management side of things, then what needs are human financial advisors satisfying?
Well, this was the second paper that Alberto and I did. There was a Vanguard survey that had gone out, and we decided to write sort of an academic version of it to look at the non-pecuniary factors involved in selecting. Why do I use a financial advisor? So presumably, one is to manage my money. Maybe two is to give me advice on other financial matters in my life. But three, what are the other sort of non-financial, non-portfolio management related, what I call non-pecuniary factors? And from this survey, it's interesting. You wouldn't be surprised by this. This is pretty basic. Number one, peace of mind, right? This whole notion that I'm better off and I sleep better at night because I have someone in charge of my money. Two is this expertise question. If I need to talk to somebody, there's someone who's a financial expert who can answer my questions. I see this, by the way, with my friends who have financial advisors, that they really do rely on them as this sort of as a point, and not the sole point of view, I would say. They actually
Mm.
solicit input from lots of different parties, but they actually rely on that person as a source of financial information. Then the third is this delegation issue, freeing up time and delegating to someone who's professionally qualified. So those are sort of standard reasons. It wouldn't surprise you that those are the common reasons clients chose. Now, you might ask, this was sort of a separate paper, but some colleagues of mine, Cindy Pagliaro and Anna Madama, they took the same survey and they deconstructed, they tried to estimate the total relationship value due to emotional factors versus financial factors. And they came up with a 50-50 split. And this was a real, they took a clients assigned value to over 20 some activities that advisors did for them in the survey. And they used the same survey data we did. And they sort of partitioned that into the value derived from hard things like managing a portfolio and the other stuff for like personal coaching and interaction with the advisor and trustworthiness of the advisor and the value from that. And they assigned 50% to these, I call them social psychological factors or emotional factors, which I thought was quite interesting.
What was the title of that paper?
Oh, gosh, I, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'll find it for you. But it's the same data set, but they just did this estimate. You know
Well, you
where
can.
this is kind of relevant? You had Juhani Linnemar on here, right? Where
Yep.
he was talking about all the results. Yeah, I think this is one of the interesting challenges for academic research and portfolio construction because, and his work is great, showing that the portfolio management side, the portfolio management pillar, is not on average adding value relative to fees charged, and then advisors sort of put everyone in the same portfolio regardless, et cetera, et cetera. But the but that does raise this question about what are these other attributes, the source of value that, and is this sort of the cost drag of paying for this, or is this because people aren't aware of the cost drag here? Maybe they would demand more value from this. They understood that. But I do think that's this research is all pointing to this question of the non-pecuniary benefits of financial advice, financial advisors, which I think is really important, and how to measure it. I think it's going to be the next wave of challenge in the industry.
Yeah, I know in one of Ioanni's papers, I don't know if it's in a published paper or if it's in one of their working papers, but they make that comment of like, we see this advised clients are underperforming the market, which either implies that they're making a mistake by paying for advice or that they're deriving a pretty significant amount of value from the service.
There you go.
Right.
Or both.
Yeah, or a combination. That's probably closer to where the answer is. So you mentioned some of the things that the important needs, the top needs that cause people to want an advisor, peace of mind being right up there. Which I got a real quick story. We recently had a conversation with a client who is like fine financially, and they told us that for them it was completely life changing to have a budget, which we helped them create, and to have a financial planning model with the Monte Carlo simulation that based on their budget shows them they're going to be okay. And like they're going to be fine. They're quite wealthy, but I just thought such a simple thing for them to say that was life changing. I mean, it's just I thought that was fascinating, and it fits with the peace of mind idea. What needs are not important? Like what needs do people not find important from an advisor?
Well, let me respond to your scenario actually a little bit. So in this paper, we had actually all these very granular needs, like the transparency of fees, portfolio management and allocation, tax planning, budgeting, some broader financial planning considerations, and even interpersonal issues like a person I can trust, a person I can have a connection with. Notice those are two different, very distinct questions. And one of my favorite was a person who can resolve disputes between me and my partner or spouse, which is a very important with married couples or unmarried couples, is a really important problem for financial advice. And when we group them up into five high level categories, this one called trust and transparency, but the second one was exactly what you were saying, which was we called it self improvement, which was a terrible term, but what it meant was I got my life organized. I have a plan. I am successful because I have a plan. Someone's in charge. We fixed problems and we're moving forward. And I have a vision going forward. And that when you talk to when you talk in general about research about financial advisors, there's a lot of focus on behavioral coaching during market downturns, which I think is a really important service feature. And I think we've done that to greatest an extent because there are all these other attributes that I just listed that come into play. And we always we used to we would it's kind of like at the time we were doing this research, one of my colleagues working on this had just hired a financial had pardon me a trainer at the gym and said it's the same kind of concept. I'm getting a plan, I'm executing on the plan. It's not necessarily I'm losing weight and I look great or I'm more fit. It's actually I have a plan for my physical fitness. There's a sense of ownership and pride and success that comes from that. Anyway, and the other thing that advise besides so trust, self improvement, and then this knowledge thing, having access to knowledge, getting more knowledge about my affairs, knowing more about the markets. The thing that what surprised us most, and this gets back to what we were talking about with Johanni's paper, which is the investment component of the value chain was the least important to traditional clients who have advisors. In other words, portfolio construction, rebalancing, tax loss harvesting. What else did we ask about? Performance, relative performance, which is an important message to, first of all, obviously, I think you should report on performance and you should report on fees, and people should understand that and know that because that's an important benchmark. We have to do that from a regulatory and fiduciary perspective. But reminding clients of these other attributes are really quite valuable because they are valuable to clients. And it's important to know that people devalue the investment performance relative to the marketing pitch that an advisor gives to a client. So I think there's a lot to be learned there from a very practical point of view about how you pitch things to clients and also what clients derive ultimate satisfaction from.
So interesting. That organizational piece is
sorry,
huge. Mark. Yeah, sorry. I was going to say that organizational piece, and I've said this before, that just getting organized with your finances is such a massive catalyst towards financial success. And on the other hand, rarely do I meet somebody who's very well organized financially, who's not also well on track to meet or exceed their financial goals. So it can be just a balance sheet and an income statement, honestly, for most people, can be a massive, massive catalyst. And it can remove such a huge mental burden as well that it often becomes the thing from which they can kind of leap forward, at least anecdotally in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And all I would say is that the survey data of large groups of traditionally advised clients, as well as other types of advised clients like robo advisors, people who use robo advice services, they also have this broad sense of self-improvement, self-organization, finally taking charge of my finances, which is quite distinct from coaching me during market downturns, which is distinct from helping me and my spouse or partner resolve disputes about money. There's a rich territory here that goes beyond just behavioral coaching and market downturns.
Mm-hmm. Ben, did you have something to add there? I cut you off.
No, all good. Keep going.
Nice. Okay. So how are unadvised investors' needs different from those that work with a robo or traditional advisor?
Well, as you'd expect, unadvised people are less interested in trust because there's no one to trust. It's really they're executing on their own, and they're also less focused on having these knowledge attributes, having someone to talk to because there's no one to talk to. They're really doing all that on their own. I will say this: one of the things we did not ask, but we thought about it afterwards, is for do-it-yourself investors, there's a big question about trust in the institution they're dealing with. So let's say you're a U.S. investor and you're dealing with E-Trade or Vanguard or Fidelity or whoever, and you're self-directed. there still is trust elements, but it's not the trust in an advisor, but it's more institutional brand trust, a company I can work with successfully, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to make that point. When I say trust, I mean having a person you can trust. Obviously, it's
Hmm.
not relevant because of course, they trust themselves.
Right. What determines how much value investors place on advice?
Well, whether you ask about the top three needs, or if you ask now, where do they assign value, the most value? Turns out this trust category, trust is a broad category. It's not only a person that can trust, but it's also transparency on fees and knowing what you get for value for the money. That the overall perceived value of the relationship comes from that category. Um, and again, as we said, it's really that it's this self-improvement and this knowledge category. All these three categories are the ones that drive this perceived value. So if you want to increase perceived value, clients perceived value, those are really the top three you need to focus on.
Hmm.
And in the paper, we have the itemized questions. So you could see, for example, under trust, it's not simply about a person you can trust, but it's also about transparency and um, uh, the understanding how their people are getting paid, even though people don't understand. I'm going to talk about that, and I know it a little bit. Um, so, it's a broader category than this quote unquote person you can trust. So that's the
Huh.
category label.
Yeah. Okay.
So how do investors think about the trade-offs then between the fees that they pay and the value of advice?
So I don't know if you have this experience, but literally every survey I've done in my career on fees, no one understands them at all. And that's the conclusion that we make from this survey. So it started off pretty well. We asked the question, how do you think, actually I have an anecdote here. Years ago, I sat down, I was having coffee with two friends of mine who are entrepreneurs, small business entrepreneurs, quite successful. They had a portfolio being run by a family member, a nephew, who worked for a big, very reputable US, it was a brokerage firm, but it was very much clearly organized along an RIA model. It wasn't a transaction-based compensation. But I asked them, I said, so just out of curiosity, this was way back when I was doing some research on fees before this project. And I said, how's your nephew get paid? Well, I'm sure, no, he probably doesn't get paid. Does he get paid? Who pays him? We're talking back then, we're talking about multi-million dollars portfolio.
Wow.
He surely must get paid.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think he does too. I know he gets paid, he gets a salary, but how does it come out of your money? And they said, that's a good question. Now, these were college educated, very intelligent and aware. So you can't say, oh, it's a lack of schooling, or they're
Hmm.
not, they're very talented business people. They knew where every penny went in their business. So that's the extent of the challenge. So what we saw in this survey, clients seemed to have a sense of how they were getting paid, we thought. So half said AUM, and then smaller fractions said transaction, flat dollar, I'm not sure. We thought, okay, that's seems low for AUM fees, but let's go with that's right. Let's ask another question, quantity wise, how much are you paying a year? 70% refused to answer the question. 30% who tried said the mean fees were 6.7% a year.
Oh my.
Not 67 basis points, 670
Wow.
basis points.
Oh,
Some people said I pay 1 basis point. Some people say I pay 10 basis points. And we thought, well, there are a few people in this survey who were doing Robo, but even the Robo stuff was a little bit higher than that. But some clients said 90% a year.
what?
Yeah. And the mean turned out that's why the mean got to be 6. We should have done a trimmed mean, right?
Oh wow.
So that then led us to question whether they really understood the question in front of that,
Right.
right? So so what I would conclude from this, if you're a regulator or an industry participant or you're a client, people really do need help understanding how advisors getting paid from this. This is a broad-based national survey, so we're not picking on any specific firm. And it really does highlight the need for a very simple, straightforward, we get paid this way and roughly this amount a year, and simple, basic information so people can really know what they're paying.
Yeah, I've definitely seen the same thing. We are super transparent about fees, and it's disclosed multiple times to clients when we're onboarding them. But if you ask a client how much they pay us, in a lot of cases, they don't know.
Maybe we should increase our fees to 90%.
Go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, maybe there's room to increase our fees up to 90%. Maybe those people are paying 90%. Maybe they're getting a ton of value.
Or at least 670 basis points.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, obviously, clearly, some of this is a percentage problem. A lot of people struggle with percentages.
Right.
And obviously, if you paid 95% fees, you wouldn't have any money next year, virtually no money, certainly 2 years. You'd have zero. And the second thing is, my suspicion is that because this is not, people switch advisors once a decade, if that, or maybe more frequently, 7 years, maybe less frequently, every 15 years. And if they do, that's when they think about prices. And so pricing,
Right.
it's not, there's no frequency and transparency. But it does say
Right.
people do need help.
Would correcting investors' miscalculations about what they're paying for advice change their decision to pay for it?
So yeah, that's what we'd like to conclude. I mean, you think there'd be a revolution in the marketplace if people knew what they were paying, but I actually don't. So there's two arguments against that. One is that people don't value many of the financial aspects. They value the non-pecuniary aspects. So
Right.
we really don't know the price. What would you pay for having a good relationship with a person you can trust, who is open and easy and accessible to talk to, as an expert you can speak to, who help organize your finances? We don't really know the price of that. And I think you would find that for the people who would say, gosh, this is a lot of money and I need more justification for value, you'd be also surprised by the number of people who said, wow, I only pay that to get that value. So I really don't think we have a very clear indication. We do know that among the 30% who gave us fee data, we do know that regardless of what fees, their level of trust was unrelated to the fee level. So in this very small sample, granted 70% gave us no fee data, but of this 30%, at least it suggests there isn't a very clear indication of how it would work out. So that's why I'm actually in favor of the disclosure, just because people should know. But it's not clear that it will affect their perception. It's back to the quote you had from Johanni's paper. It's not really clear which direction it will go.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think I know how you're going to answer this, but what reasons do traditionally advised people in your sample give for not switching to robo advising?
Well, it's the human element. It's definitely someone to talk to. So separately, as part of the survey, after we asked about all these value questions, we did ask this very specific question about, among robo-advised people, why'd you choose it? And then among non-robo-advised, what'd you consider switching? And they said, look, it's really having someone to talk to. I don't want an algorithm in charge of my money. I want a person in charge. And number three was, I don't trust technology, which is what led to our third paper on algorithmic aversion. We were presenting results we were just talking about earlier from the Vanguard DIY to advise clients at a seminar, and Ruud Ramadori at Imperial College discussed it, and he said, there's an underlying theme here among traditional advisors, but even among people who choose to switch to a robo advisor, this idea that you might be averse to technology being in charge. And so that's the big factor for why, broadly speaking, traditionally advised clients are used to that human contact, and they're not used to the machines being in charge. By the way,
All
I
right,
think,
moving on up to-
By the way, I was just going to say, I think that's going to change, right? Because it's a technological adoption is a generational thing. And I think younger people are much more comfortable relying on algorithms to suggest whether it's streaming options or healthcare choices or debt choices or cars you should buy or how to buy cars. There's this whole technological revolution that's being led by younger people. So it's only a matter of time, I think, that there'll be greater and greater reliance on algorithms. But as a general rule, if you ask traditional advice clients today, it's this dislike of algorithms, the preference for human contact.
Algorithms could get more human in the way that they interface with people too, like with AI, LLM type communication. It feels a lot more natural, but I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about AI. One of the things that I still find is that when I have expertise in something and I start trying to get information from like ChatGPT, for example, about that thing, whether it's an academic paper that I'm familiar with or a more general concept, I find it still makes errors that are really hard to identify unless you already have significant expertise. Andrew Chen, who's a past guest on this podcast, he tweeted a while ago that as AIs get better, AI problems are just becoming human problems. It's just you have to trust the AI in the same way that you have to trust a person. So it'd be interesting to see how all that stuff changes people's perception of algorithms and technology.
Yeah, I found that to be the case too. For another paper, I'm working on a paper on health span, unrelated topic. It's one of I do some retirement stuff, aging, and with a friend of mine, Olivia Mitchell at Wharton, and we were both like, okay, let's enlist ChatGPT as a research assistant. Okay, that wasn't very useful.
Yeah, no, I found the same thing, and it's
Yeah,
scary, right? Because it's like if I do a paper, if I'm asking it to help me interpret a paper that I'm already very familiar with, I'll find glaring errors that you wouldn't know unless you're already familiar with the paper. So now I'm scared to ask it about
yeah,
a paper I'm not already familiar with, and it's like, what's the point?
right, right, right.
Yeah.
And it's very good at writing a very nice, the French term is précis, but then they used to use these summaries that are these beautiful bullet point
Mm,
summaries of the three factors involved in, if, for example, I think they would do a decent summary of this paper we were just discussing. Oh, trust is important.
yeah.
They sort of ended with that.
Yeah. 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 What effect does a relationship with a good, and you can define good, advisor have on investor behavior through periods of poor market performance?
So this is a segue to this third paper with Tarun and Skardwalter, one of his colleagues, and Fiona Greggett, as well as Fiona Greggett at Vanguard and Alberto at Georgetown. And so we sort of took this CAS um, environment where people were assigned robo advice, and we began to study the impact of the advisor, this whole so-called behavioral coaching question, but using um, this robo advice setting. And we didn't really have a measure for the quality of an advisor. So we just said, who are the people who manage to retain clients? That's
Mm,
sort of a measure. Uh, we could have obviously gone back and tried to get attributes of them of the individuals. We could have actually gone through video chat client video chat transcripts to see how good they
wow.
were. But there are all kind of daunting problems with that. Um, but we thought we're going to pick this one thing, which is the better client. Who are the client the advisors who keep more clients in the service? Um, how do they behave during periods of market turbulence? And well, this was a really kind of striking thing. They do the same that poor advisors do during periods of market turbulence. In other words, the poor and the good quality and the poor quality advisors both reach out, both do hand holding, both talk about long-term investing. The big difference is that the high quality investors talked to clients more
Hmm.
before the market turbulence, during periods of benign markets or rising markets. So basically, what it suggests is a spillover effect that the more time you spend building a client relationship and there is no market turbulence, the more willing that client is, say, to trust you. during periods of market downturns, which I thought was actually a very pretty and practical tool to think about from an advice perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're worried about if you're running an advisory business and you're worried about, oh, if there's a market downturn, how many clients might leave us because they're disappointed? The answer is don't sit around and prepare better bear market communication strategies and tools for your advisors to reach out. Start building the relationship now,
Hmm.
because it's that relationship that's going to spill over into the bear market.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's largely about communication. Was there anything else that changed with, I guess, call it lower quality advisors?
Well, they're exactly the mirror image. They were less likely to reach out, and interestingly, you might find this fascinating because you're in a business like this. Uh, they had in benign market conditions, they had similar levels of communication with clients, except the client communications were driven by the client reaching out,
Hmm.
and so it really if your business model is don't call the clients when times are good because they don't want to hear from us, the answer from here is they're going to trust you more in the market downturn and they're more likely to stay with you and not be disappointed. And it was really kind of interesting. The other sort of factor that what we were able to sort of deconstruct, we were able to deconstruct how much of this had to do with the quality of the advisor persuading me that the robo advice was doing a good job managing my money. So we saw that if you were with a low quality advisor, you're as a client, you spent more time on the website trying to understand parts of the website that explain how the methodology works.
Oh, well.
Whereas if you were with a high quality advisor, you never went online.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything, so there's a persuasive, so the two elements here are, number one, do proactive outreach to clients, but be a good I want to say salesman, but I don't mean selling, but I mean promoting or communicating, a good educator about the investment process that we use to manage your money during good
Hmm.
and bad times. So it sounds like, I know it sounds like really basic information, and seems like what's the term I'm looking for? It seems very intuitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is empirically verified that if you do proactive reach out and you do a better job explaining what you're doing, you're going to retain clients longer.
So it's the frequency and quality of the communication, essentially.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the talent that the person has in explaining why your money is being managed in a sound way. And that's what I found really interesting is, we see the clients of the low quality advisors going on trying to figure out how their money is being managed, not just looking at their
Mm-hmm.
accounts, but looking at the explanations for how we manage money on your behalf.
Wow.
And when they left the service, because they had lower retention, in exit interviews, they cited dissatisfaction with the methodology. So they weren't just
Wow.
dissatisfied with the advisor, they were dissatisfied with the robo advice methodology.
Wow.
So
Was it their understanding of that methodology or lack of
yes,
understanding of the
their
methodology?
lack of understanding, exactly.
Mm.
They distrust it
Huh.
more. They found it less trustworthy. And that just showed so getting back to the point, even this very successful hybrid robo advisory service, the quality advisor really stood out as a critical success factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. We did a group, a talk for a small group of clients recently, and we just did basic stuff. We talked about like the origins of asset pricing models and market efficiency and whatever, index funds, challenges with managers outperforming, lack of persistence, like just basic stuff. And we use index funds and dimensional funds primarily to build portfolios for clients. We talked a little bit about that and why we think that makes sense. Stuff that I said just now, it's basic stuff. And afterwards, the feedback was like that was just such incredible information. Like, we feel so much better of what you guys are doing now. And it's it's interesting how I would call it basic, but then to a client, it's really important information to help them understand what it is that we're doing and why. So that all really resonated.
Well, that's just it, Ben. Like, it's basic
Makes
to us
sense.
because we've been in it for a long time, and it's
Right.
second nature, right? But to the general public, like, that's really, really deep, fascinating information, I think.
Yeah.
really helping understand the black box, how my money's being managed is I think the broader lesson. There's a lesson here for robo advice, which is you have to explain what the machine is doing on your behalf and on behalf of the advisor. But the broader investment for non-traditionally advised or traditionally advised clients or people with less automated processes is it's still this communication about the investment methodology that matters.
Hmm.
By the way, I don't know how you think about this, but honestly, the more I talk to RIAs, most of them do have some automated processes anyway, even quote unquote traditional shops, like the strategic allocation process, all standardized, the customization process. There's 15 levers you can flip, but you can't flip 20. So there's a standardization that seems to be occurring. So I just think longer term, more and more of different aspects of the investment process, even like rebalancing strategy. It's not going to be sort of hey, we should take some money off the table, or this sort of casual conversation with a client and then trying to figure out the tax piece. It's going to be much more rigorous and much more automated with the advisor communicating what the methodology is saying
Yep.
rather than doing the math themselves.
Yep. Yeah, our business on portfolio management is hyper automated.
Yeah.
On rebalancing, on asset allocation models. So yeah, I totally agree
Yeah.
with that. In this sample, so we talked about helping them get through market crashes. What other benefits are investors in this sample getting from the human advisors?
So I took this question as a way we did some really interesting calculations. We built this really fancy model, which you haven't asked me any questions about, which is fine because it's too complicated to discuss today, about algorithmic aversion among investors and clients. But that model allowed us to come up with these really fascinating estimates, which blew my mind.
Hmm.
A high quality advisor in our model is worth a 30 basis point increase in lifetime total return.
Wow.
That seems pretty shocking. Another way to put that is a high quality advisor. If I'm with a high quality advisor and someone said, "Oh, Ben, you're a high quality Mark, I'll make Mark the high quality advisor. Mark's my high quality advisor, but Mark's too busy, so we're going to assign you to Ben, and he's kind of low quality." I, as a client, would ask for 10% increase in my current wealth to switch to the low quality advisor.
Wow.
And if I'm running a firm from a profitability perspective, it's a 25 basis point increase in my gross profits, in my sort of corporate surplus from that relationship by having a high quality advisor. So depending on which way you look at it, whether it's the client perspective or the business perspective, this whole question of high quality advice versus low quality advice is really at the heart of the economics of the business and benefits to clients. That's why, to me, this paper we did, it's kind of interesting, academic, but it just scratches the surface of. So now I think there's a real opportunity for academia and for industry to go deep on the determinants of high quality advice. And maybe it is running seminars on, manager persistence and capital markets efficiency and all that sort of stuff. It could be, because it could be that's the sort of information about the investment process that builds trust and transparency and strong relationships. And not doing that is an example of where but there's real money to be sort of made here for the client and for the firm by thinking more about quality of the advisor relationship.
I mean, this podcast, I think it's another example. We get a lot of new clients from the podcast. We have a lot of clients that listen to the podcast, and it's much more scalable and systematic than doing in-person seminars. Maybe it's not quite the same, but it has some of the similar effects. Mm-hmm. You mentioned your model being too complicated, and I didn't ask about it. Yes, because it was too complicated, and I was reading it. And I was like, I don't even know what to ask. But those numbers are crazy. Like, can you give some intuition about where that's coming from?
Well, it's literally coming from this. In a world in which I'm algorithmic averse, a high quality advisor persuades me that the advisory methodology that is accompanying us along the process of managing our money is in fact valuable and worth following. Therefore, I
Okay.
stay with the advisor, and it's that it's really got a client retention effect.
Okay.
It's the effect of high turnover. But if I had said it the other way, there are two firms. One has high advisor turnover for whatever reason, unrelated to our research, and there's one firm with very low advisor and client turnover. Let's say quad. Let's Sorry, that wasn't the right way to put it. There was one firm with high client turnover, one firm with low client turnover. Economics of the high turnover client are terrible relative to the economics of the low turnover firm. So it's that kind of idea that it's this this kind of quality, and what are the going back to the survey work with Alberto. Okay, so what elements of trust what elements of self-organization are we deriving? What elements of those needs are driving the value? I think there's a lot of work to be done on this.
So you talked about communication, but what are the attributes that define a high retention advisor in your research?
Uh, I don't know. I would say so. In our research, I guess, in our this is where I think there's this real opportunity to make it tangible for individuals. So in our research, can you imagine going to a firm and saying, "Okay, Ben, I'd like to see your 10-year client retention numbers compared to everyone else in the firm, and if you're not in the top half, I'm not taking you." Okay, so the metric that we had came up with. It's obviously very imperfect. So I think that's the real opportunity here for firms to figure out how to promote this idea. What are the drivers of advisor quality, and what are the characteristics that we want to lead with clients? But it's obviously it's um, that's actually where we recognize in this paper we're sort of at the edge of what we could do, because we couldn't get into sort of the life histories of our advisors, their characteristics. So simple demographic, their psychological characteristics. But I think if I were a client, I'd probably look for all those attributes that we talked about earlier. Someone you trust, someone you can work with, someone you have a communication with, someone who's transparent with you, who feels transparent with you, and so forth. That's what you really have to rely on. But ideally, you ask about 10-year client retention rates.
You could probably ask about that. We'd give people those numbers. We track them.
I don't think
Okay,
I've ever
there
been
you go.
asked that. I get asked for referrals, like direct testimonials, like get asked if they can talk to one of my other clients directly, but not necessarily. I don't
Right.
think I've ever been asked about retention rates. That's really interesting.
I don't like when people ask for referrals. I say we can do that. We've got clients who are willing to talk to you, but I'm going to pick the best ones. They're going to give
Of
the
course.
best. So I don't know how valuable this is to you. Like if you
Yes.
want to talk to someone, that's fine. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm always a bit hesitant to do that. Okay, so we talked about AI and where technology is going and stuff like that. What do your results in these papers suggest about the role of human financial advice in an increasingly automated world?
It's the same thing we talked about earlier. So behind the scenes, traditional advisors have a lot of automated processes, and it's only going to become more automated. And the example of the personal advice, these robo advisory services and hybrid robo advisory services, it's interesting who uses them, by the way. I mean, if you look at sort of broad industry data, this is maybe 5 years old or so. I haven't really looked at this in a while, but it's young people who are interested in a new thing on the, some money to invest in, or
Mm.
interested in a new thing on the block. But it's also very affluent older investors who are experimenting
Hmm.
to see, oh, I'll take 10% of my portfolio and give it to a robo advisor and see what it does with it compared to what my traditional advisor is doing. So there's going to be this gradual technological adoption, and I'm with you that there's going to be this human interface, because at least for now, the AI, even if there's a next generation of quality, right now the AI technology is just too erratic, um, and hallucinates too much. So I can't see a virtual. I could see it as an augmentation to a very domain specific digital advisor. So I'm going to create a human like figure who's going to talk to you rather than the digital advisor that does everything through the CX interface of the digital device you're on. But I can't see it replacing traditional for a while. But I do see this world in which traditional, the human component becomes the explicator, the explainer of what the machine is doing. And if
There's some research on.
go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
Some research on the impact of AI on knowledge workers. That kind of suggests that it brings the lowest quality ones up closer to the average. It doesn't necessarily make the best ones better, but it could have the same effect on financial advice, where a very mediocre financial advisor gets a lot better because maybe they're getting help or prompts from an AI assistant. So that could happen.
Yes, and the AI system who reads this paper will say, call up the guy who
Right.
hasn't reached out to your client. You actually need to reach out to these 3 clients proactively
Exactly.
this week because come the next market downturn, you're going to lose out.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So what do you think financial advisors should be focusing on then in their practices to be as valuable to their clients as possible?
Well, this is me speculating more as a manager and hirer of people than a sort of person who managed different parts of businesses over the years. But I think the human interpersonal skills side is absolutely critical. And it used to be that, of course, the investment business meant sales skills, and it still does in a lot of corners. But now I think the leading advisors, it's empathy, clarity of communications, reading the client and the client and partner for comprehension and understanding. It really is these soft uh, emotional intelligence skills, I think, are definitely what I would invest in if I were, say, running an advisory firm today. And I would hire for that as well as invest in it. I definitely think this idea of the persuasiveness of the investment approach, people, if Mark is really that good at explaining the investment process and Ben isn't, we should get Ben learning from Mark, and we should be distilling the best explication, the best explainer of our investment process. We should make that more universal. And then the other things I think would just be basic building block things. Like, first of all, this general financial knowledge question. You see that in all these surveys that after trust and transparency, the issue is having access to an expert. So the depth and roundness of the training for the individual. I do think with AI, though, and especially in larger firms, it's not about you knowing everything, you, the personal advisor. It's about you being seen by the client as a person who can get the information that I need, not immediately at your fingertips, but through other channels or through an AI chat box that you then filter to make sure it's correct. And then the fourth thing I would say, based on the whole body of research, is this transparency around fees and value added. I mean, I think you just need to be absolutely transparent in dollar terms and percentage terms about how much people are paying. But I also think you don't just leave it at that. You actually have to talk about your value added in terms of capabilities, and not just the numerical, we rebalance your portfolio, we did this, we did that, not the sort of transactional piece, but also the emotional planning, organizing piece. So I think those are pretty basic ideas that come out of this research that seem pretty fundamental to the future of financial advisors.